So, like this video, every time I just worrying about we cannot find any Japanese people speaking with or discussing any kind of the rest of the world, not only Africa. So, China is heavily involved in Africa now, but not only Africa, all over the world. But Japanese are not. So this is our most concerns. And our government pay money, but not so much compared with Chinese, but still no Japanese people out there. So this is a big problem, I think.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, at least this video is showing that Chinese involvement on the ground, working on actual and huge infrastructure projects is obvious. But the guy from China, the Chinese and China is also well involved, heavily involved in this kind of the opportunities such as news media in speaking out their opinion, while sometimes some of the problem will be put on Chinese activities. But at least the Chinese are involved in the media. So it should have been Japanese on Al Jazeera.
No.
Yeah, whether it's Africa, whether it's Southeast Asia, where especially the Japanese, the government is providing the big fund for infrastructure and some of the project, government project.
They have government projects, yes, but
yeah, even in the country, we never seen this kind of video where the Japanese is speaking out the positive aspect and also some downside of the project, which may cause some problem on the ground. We never seen the video with Japanese. That is the problem. And then this guy in this video is well educated. His English is some, and his character is also humble and sophisticated. Saying the first thing and the big most important thing is to understand the local context and also let the local person also understand how Chinese way.
Right.
So Chinese is more like this guy in this video is get more and more educated and also acting humble. So I think the Japanese is so
none of Japanese. None of Japanese can involve kind of activity among any kind of country or Africa or whatever. Okay, let's move on. Next is also talk Africa, Chinese technology in Africa. By the way, which company they are making this video stream? Oh, Al Jazeera. Okay, next one is maybe Al Jazeera again. This is no new railway had been built for the past 100 years until now. The new standard gauge railway, upon completion, will connect Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan. It's Kenya's biggest infrastructural project since independence, but even more impressive is the way it's being done. Chinese technology is combining with Kenyan skills to create one of the best examples of technology transfer on the continent. This is an example of transcontinental support in the run-up to the 6th Forum of China-Africa Cooperation in South Africa. OK。これはあれですよね、ケニア、ウガンダと、ルワンダとサウススーダン、2015年に関して、で、去年の末にできた予定ですよね。3万人の雇用。で、中国人も2000人が参加していると。中国はアフリカの公衆性を大いに気にしていることが言葉の話に加える。文化の違いを認識している。バランス。アグリゲート。アグリゲート。うん。これね、映らないんですよね。この格好。Outrage. Ingenious. 短いね、これね。え？長いわ。なんと、優しい。長いね、これ。Okay, dead very long. Just me. これはだけど CCTV だから、これ宣伝ビデオで。わかりやすい。Easy to understand, I believe. Okay, let's go.
Has been built for the past 100 years until now. Behind me is the new standard gauge railway, which upon completion will connect Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, and Rwanda. It is Kenya's biggest.
Okay, this you have a look map. This is Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan. This is not high-speed rail. This is normal railways, I think.
Yes, infrastructural project since independence. But even more impressive is the way it is being done. Now, Chinese technology is combining with Kenyan skills to create one of the best examples of technological transfers on the continent. In this special series, we'll be unpacking more examples of transcontinental support in the run-up to the 6th Forum for China-Africa Cooperation in South Africa. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to this special edition of Talk Africa. Now, the construction of the standard gauge railway by the China Road and Bridge Corporation was started in January of 2015. It is set to be complete by December of 2017. Now, 30,000 jobs have been created by this project, and with it, the transfer of skills and technology from Chinese minds to Kenyan hands. And with me now is the Deputy Project Manager of Section 2 of the Standard Gauge Railway, Mr. Chan, who's joining me with more. Mr. Chan, thank you very much for your time here. Now, 30,000 jobs have been created by this project. Why is this a good example of technology transfer?
我们对于这个人才培养，我们在这儿基本上分两步走。第一是建立了。
We have put a lot of emphasis on the training of the local Kenyan talent, so that once the project has been completed, they can handle similar tasks like this one on their own. There are two major steps that we take to train the employees. This is in both the theoretical and practical approaches of building a railway. We use real-life demonstrations on site to show our employees how the process is carried out. In addition to this, our technology the local employees have become completely capable of handling all the procedures of the experiments for the project and all the tests that are required. After training for 1 year on the site, our Kenyan employees are then able to take on all the many and various roles in the construction of the project. So now our Kenyan employees are fully capable of working on this railway. And in the future, they can also use the skills for any other projects that are built in Kenya as well.
What will be the benefit to Kenya?
You see, when our Kenyan employees first started working with us, most of them had very little previous knowledge about building a railway. Now, it's only been a year and they have already learned the skills and technologies needed from our training and demonstration programs. These new skills can be further applied during the later stages of our projects or even other railway projects in Kenya in the future. I think it will really help a lot to spur the development of Kenya's own railway construction capacity to greater heights.
What is the cooperation like between the Kenyan staff and the Chinese staff?
Our Chinese and Kenyan employees seem to really get along quite well together. Our entire workforce is divided into different teams that are composed of both Chinese and Kenyan staff working together. These teams have different tasks and jobs to do, but together they have helped accelerate the process of the project and move it forward. Also, our Chinese staff have learned basic Swahili to help them communicate with their Kenyan colleagues and are learning more. Our Kenyan staff have learned some basic Chinese to help them communicate as well. This has really helped the project because their communication is effective and smooth. We have seen a very good cross-cultural friendship growing between them. Like, for example, during holidays and celebrations, they all send greeting messages to each other, and they've also started to introduce their own culture to each other during their lunch breaks and off times.
Mr. Chan, thank you. Now, while this project may be impressive, it will amount to nothing if the local staff do not have the skills and the technology to maintain this operation once it is complete. And that is why, as part of its commitment, the China Road and Bridge Corporation launched a technology transfer training lab in Voi with the express objective of transferring skills to local engineers and technicians.
I'm going to measure 0.5 grams of cement.
Lab technician Isabella Kayamba takes us through a cement quality test. The idea is to determine the quality of cement before it's used for construction of the standard gauge railway. China Road and Bridge Construction carries out all its product quality tests here at Section 2 in Voi at the central lab. Apart from cement soil, steel and even ballast are tested here.
Tests that we always do here, I've never seen any of them failing.
An indication of the specifications required to build the railway line.
First railway used the China standard in the abroad, and the material that's used in the structure that we make sure that it's qualified. The strength is not enough. The structure when the railway, when the train across the bridge, we may be clad.
In addition to the vital tests done here, the CRBC Technology Transfer Center aims to provide training for unskilled workers and pass on new skills to those already engaged in the work on this standard gauge railway project.
It is really a benefit to us because you see, like when we come from school, from campus, we don't have the experience. So through that training, we were built up, and now we think we can do what is required for us to do as lab technicians.
The training center established at Section 2 is a pilot program for the FDR project, and more centers are expected to be launched in other campsites under the project. Matthew Edwards, CCTV.
Now, This is Jacob Mutua. He works in the lab here in Voi. He's a laboratory technician. Jacob, what have you learned here so far?
In this laboratory, I have learned about cement, I have learned about soil and aggregate and steel and concrete. We have different rooms, as you have seen. We have this is the cement laboratory we are in. Next to here, we have geotechnical, which deals with soil. And we have aggregate or ballast laboratory, which I'm in charge of. Then we have concrete lab and we have steel lab. So this training has been of much help to us, since from class we have the theoretical knowledge, and when we get to this place we get the practical knowledge of the railway, which is new in Kenya.
Okay, so you mentioned that you're in charge of one of the labs here. What is the cooperation like between the Kenyan staff and the Chinese staff here?
Well, the Kenyan staff, the Chinese staff, we have got the privilege of learning from different cultures, especially when we know that we work with guys from different areas of the country, and also we work with Chinese staff. We have Chinese staff in the laboratory. We learn their culture, and we also know that it's a bit different the way we do work here and the way China does work. So we get to catch up with their speed, so that when in future we have got maybe another project in the country or anywhere else in the continent, we can learn as well to work with their speed. So it's good for us to interact with them.
All right, Jacob, thank you very much. Well, we're going to take a short break here on the program, and when we return, my expert guests will help unpack technology transfer on the continent and its benefits for both China and Africa. To stay with us.
A Chinese saying goes, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. That's exactly what the project is doing here. With these techniques and skilled people, Kenya Railways as well as African railways will be faster and stronger.
Now, barely 1 year since breaking ground on the standard gauge railway, the China Road and Bridge Corporation has become Kenya's biggest employer outside of government, employing 30,000 workers working across 9 sections just like this one. And they are also being equipped with other skills that were previously unavailable to them. Well, I sat down with expert guests to get a clearer picture of technology transfer on the continent and its benefits to China and Africa. Well, to help broaden this discussion, I have expert guests standing by. In Nairobi, Professor Michael Chege. He's an advisor at the Kenyan Ministry of Planning and National Development. In Beijing, Professor Tang Xiaoyang. He's an associate professor at the Department of International Relations at the Tsinghua University. Thank you both, gentlemen, for joining in the conversation. Professor Chege in Nairobi, let me start off with you. And my starting point of this discussion is Kenya Standard Gauge Railway, which is being built by the China Road and Bridge Corporation. It employs about 25,000 local people and 2,000 Chinese employees. It is Kenya's first railway now in about 120 years. Now, in terms of technology transfer, what are we seeing in terms of knowledge transfer, in terms of building local capacity for the future?
It's like night and day. The old Kenya Railway was completed in 1899 from Mombasa to Nairobi. It proceeded in the next 3 or 4 years thereafter to Kisumu. It was a narrow gauge railway. It has fallen into disuse over the years and disrepair. And what Kenya really wanted was modern technology in railway carriage, particularly for the haulage of goods from Mombasa to Nairobi. And that is how the Chinese government and the China Roads and Bridges came into the operation of the agreement to put up new technology in the standard gauge railway.
Well, it's new technology in the standard gauge railway, and that's why it brings me to this question of the last railway 100 years ago. In terms of now this new technology that Kenya is acquiring from China, what is the local capacity?
Well, the local capacity for absorbing the new technology is very much there. What Kenya lacked was capital and a good partner like China to build this road. Kenya has got enough engineers, has got enough technical people, it's got a lot of well-trained and skilled people here. So it's complementary. China is bringing in credits that will enable this project to go on. Kenya is providing the labor force and also some technological skills, and China is complementing those. So I think it's a good combination of skills.
All right, it's a good complementation there of skills. Professor Tang, though, is technology transfer and knowledge transfer from China now, is that a new trend from Chinese investments to Africa?
Yeah, I think the technology transfer, it happens hand in hand with the increasing investment. So actually the Chinese government has been promoting technology transfer already for decades long, because every year over 10,000 African students and professionals and officials are trained by the Chinese aid programs. However, I think the technology transfer accompanied by the investments, they are different, because only when in the market situation and when the Africans, they can apply their technology real in the economic development and in building their competitiveness, then this technology can really find its use in Africa.
It can find its use in Africa, though, but what have been the challenges, though, to this point?
Yeah, so the most important challenge at this point is Africa's general industrial environment and also investment environment are still deficient to some extent. Therefore, then there are not enough factories which to build, and also there are not enough vocational training programs to give the African professionals opportunities to practice, to innovate, and to develop their own capacity.
All right. Professor Cheketo, yes, you did talk earlier about Kenya, for instance, having the expertise, but Professor Tang is saying that there is not enough industries or manufacturing segments there for Africans particularly to practice their trade. Do you agree with that?
I think it is true that manufacturing as a component of economic growth and development in Africa is low, that new technology generally compared to the developing countries is low, and that the capacity to innovate and compete globally is low. Having said that, one must understand that Africa has 54 countries. A country like Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, those are countries that are already, if you like, not deficient in technical innovation and capacity. In fact, Nigeria and Kenya are net exporters of engineers in the developed country. We have left these countries to go and look for work abroad. But as the professor has said, we also need more people, particularly at tertiary level, more technical institutions. We need more training for people that will support engineers who come in here. And we, at the same time, need to upgrade our skills in agriculture, first and foremost, which is always the most difficult place to have innovation, and also the most important part of most African economies, in manufacturing generally, but also in the service sector. If you look at the service sector and look at technical innovation in Kenya in information communications technology, right, like the use of mobile money on the mobile phone, you see the evidence of real innovation. But as I said, you have to be very specific about which country you're talking about and about what kind of technology.
All right. Professor Tango, in terms of Africa needing more expertise and that sort of thing, and in terms of China's policy of knowledge transfer and building local capacity, what direction though is that policy taking? Because China and Africa cooperation and the technology transfer has been a priority for that since 2012. What direction is the policy taking?
I think the policy is encouraging pragmatic cooperation between China and Africa. So that's what also now the Chinese government says South-South cooperation. Because China, from its own development experience, it has found that technological evolution is critical to a country's development. But it also has found that in order to acquire technology, you need practice in the business, and also to work both public and private sectors, and also to engage with other countries, to learn from other countries. So this experience from China's own development, they are important now in the South-South cooperation, because China knows that knowledge in one country, it may not work in another country. Therefore, the Africans, they should also then adapt. They should learn, but they also need to adapt and then innovate their own technology in Africa. But through this more pragmatic investment, through trade, and through all the business cooperation to develop their own economy.
Right. Professor Chege, though, in terms of negotiations by African governments and African countries with China, are we seeing that component of knowledge transfer being a deliberate part now of negotiations?
First of all, let me say that on the whole, China tends to package its development assistance to African countries to suit those countries. Therefore, it is not the same in Kenya as it is in Angola or Gabon in the same way it is in Mozambique or Botswana. So I think that is a good start. What China has done in the last 30 years is absolutely phenomenal. And there's something in it that we as African countries can learn in how. I would like to say that to the last question about whether Chinese foreign direct investment comes with technology, it's always done that. I think a lot depends on the countries which are on the receiving end to insist that an inbuilt component of technology transfer is included. Right now, the UNDP and the UN have been very strongly encouraging between us and China this idea of South-South trade. And there was a conference here in Nairobi just 3 years ago to deal with these issues. So I think that you made a good beginning, and I believe you can do even better than we have done in the past. We have said that there are Chinese universities and colleges that are training Africans in different kinds of skills. But there's also on-the-job training. You mentioned the standard gauge railway and the people who are involved in building it, who learn on the spot and who learn through practice. There are different ways of packaging this. And perhaps we should be discussing more and more about how to package for each country a technology transfer program that suits it.
All right. I want to bring in a small criticism here, Professor Tang. And there's often criticism about Chinese labor in Africa, and there's always the question that Chinese enterprises often tend to rely more on Chinese labor than the labor of the local countries. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about China-Africa relations during recent years. So actually, the Chinese labor, they are always only a minor part in the whole staff in Chinese enterprises. The African also always made the bigger part. That we can also see from the Nairobi-Mombasa railway. So there are over 10,000 African workers are employed, but only about 2,000 Chinese are brought to Africa. So it's like a 2 to 10. So that's also the case for other enterprises. That's first because of labor regulation in African countries. Because the African, they have quite a strict visa permit policy for the foreigners, including Chinese. Second, also the Chinese business, from the economic calculation, they have to use local workers. Otherwise, the Chinese laborers, they are expensive, and they also have a lot of extra costs like flight and accommodation. And but however, we see the reason to say that a lot of Chinese are coming. It's because the Chinese investments are growing very rapidly.
All right, Professor Chege, from your perspective, though, and your observation, is that a valid criticism at this point?
I think anybody who says that the Chinese are exporting unskilled labor, and some say even prison labor, to work in Africa, should be asked to demonstrate with a concrete example where that is occurring, because I've not come across a single case like that myself. I know Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda, Southern Africa, and West Africa. I've never come across a case like this. I think what Professor has just said is more accurate, that it's very difficult for African countries to rate large-scale immigration of laborers in their country because the immigration system will not allow that. And in domestic politics, and China knows a lot about this, domestic politics will not allow labor to be imported if it's available locally. I think there's a lot of propaganda around this issue, and let's be clear about that. It is estimated there's 1 million Chinese people living in Africa. A lot of those people are individual businessmen, on people who have brought their own investment and are working and living here. So let's be clear about this, and if somebody is making those allegations, let's challenge them to provide the proof.
In winding up, though, Professor Tang, the Forum for China and African Cooperation is coming up in December. What should China be looking at in terms of Africa? What should Africa be looking at?
I think China then has put a lot of emphasis on this new FOCAC meeting. So it is already upgraded to the China-Africa Summit. Therefore, I think China actually wants to work with Africa as the continent as a whole, because a lot of African economic problems and also social political problems, they need to be handled by the African countries together. There, for example, the regional integration. Therefore, I think the Chinese government will provide some measures to work with on these networks which can connect the African continent and then facilitate its industrialization and development. While the Africans, I think, as Professor Chege rightly said, a lot of responsibility actually lie in the African countries. So African countries should have their own initiative, should do some preparation and to work out a strategy, work out Africans' own initiative to talk with China, and do not only do not only be passive, but be more positive.
All right,
and active.
Professor Chege, your final comments on this. The Forum for China-Africa Cooperation is coming up. What should Africa be demanding? In your words, Africa needs to demand more.
I think Africa needs to look back. This is going to be a historic period for the FOCAC. Look at what has happened in the previous ones. A lot of them have been very well attended by African heads of state, which means they place a lot of premium on a lot of interest, as Professor Tang has said, in FOCAC and relations between themselves and China. What has happened in the past is that they've tended to have bilateral relations and deals between each country and the People's Republic of China. I think, in my view, it is time that African countries began to realize that the Silk Road across the seas and into Africa will not happen unless our economies are better integrated. So when you're talking about infrastructure, let us, as African countries, consult one another, see what we need to do between ourselves, and let's present this to the People's Republic of China for the next FOCAC.
And we'll leave it there on this discussion. To my guests, Michael Chege in Nairobi, he's an advisor at the Kenyan Ministry of Planning and National Development, and Professor Tang Xiaoyang in Beijing. He's an associate professor at the Department of International Relations at the Tsinghua University. Thank you both for your insights.
Okay, the finish second one. Okay, moving to the next. This one is Africa's high-speed rail network. These are actually short one. Africa.
ですね。あと、日本の4時に一回チェックアウトするので、ちょっと10分ぐらい間かけてまた戻ります。4時。
4時って言うと、僕の時間の4時。日本の4時。アフリカアジェンダって2063っていうのがあるんですよね。アフリカアジェンダ。で、これは、多分2013年作ってて50年後のビジョンかな。で、このプロジェクトは、ケニアは76億ドル投資したんだよな。さっきの鉄道だな。まあ、それ中にこういうこと書いてあるってことは短いね。Artery, impetus, incur, from the team's inception, dilapidated, これよく出てくるね。dilapidated, acute, acute, これもよく出ますね。これ短い。鉄道の話ですね、これ。あれ
Africa's dream to connect all its major cities with an integrated.
これは28分もするの？嘘。単語が全然ないんだね。本当にないのかな。なんだろうな。テレビ見てこれ単語引いてないのかな。
The high-speed railway network has taken a critical step forward. Last week, a 5-year action plan was signed between the African Union Commission and China. The integrated high-speed train network is a flagship project of Africa's Continental Agenda 2063. And this 5-year plan is a result of numerous planning sessions between the African Union Commission and China to promote cooperation in transport networks and industrialization fields. So what are the key milestones and implementation timelines of the project? And what economic, social and political outcomes will be produced by Africa's high-speed rail network? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, the creation of an integrated high-speed train network that connects all African capitals is high up on the African Union's Agenda 2063 and would not only facilitate better movement of goods, people and services, but also enhance new transport and commerce arteries into Africa. And just last week, part of this goal was realized when a new 752-kilometer line linking the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa with the port of Djibouti was officially opened. It is the first modern electrified railway across the African continent, and CCTV's Girum Chala has more.
This new rail line is expected to play a significant role in transforming Ethiopia's industrial sector by enhancing the country's imports and exports and cutting travel time for freight and passenger transport. The new railway line will provide Ethiopia with fresh impetus in its push towards becoming a middle-income country.
Both international investors as well as domestic investors, there's a very substantial reduction in the cost, the transportation cost, the logistics cost that they used to incur from a cost perspective, but also from an efficiency perspective. In other words, you can now get your goods to the market much quicker. So whoever is placing orders, for example, if you're sitting in Europe, textiles, garments, leather, whatever it is that they're buying from Ethiopia, they now can manage their supply chain much more efficiently and much more reliably because they know this train will be there in 10 hours, whereas the train the trip that used to take by truck 4 days, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days.
This $3.4 billion railway line was built by China Railway Engineering Group. Exim Bank of China Bank hold up to 70% of the construction costs, with the Ethiopian government settling the difference. The project has also served to transfer the much-needed technology and skills to Ethiopia's railway transport sector.
The main duty of the Ethiopian Railways Corporation, right from its inception, was building a capacity for the nation in the railway industry. In this regard, more than 50 young citizens were trained in Russia, China and England for a Master of Science in Railways Engineering. These are the new leaders of the train industry, together with thousands of other Ethiopians working in operating our trains.
The Ethio-Djibouti Standard Gauge Railway is the first of its kind on the continent, covering a distance of 656 kilometers and powered by electricity. This modern rail is also part of the Regional Railway Transport Integration Project, connecting Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, and South Sudan.
Regional integration is critical because inter-Africa trade is only about 11-12% of overall trade. Only 12%. So in other words, Africa is actually trading outside of the continent. So this actually helps contribute to this agenda that Africa has of increasing regional trade and integration. So if you look at it today, it's Ethiopia, Djibouti. Next time, Lapset from the Kenya port via South Sudan, Ethiopia. This all can be connected to enhance the competitiveness.
Ethiopia has ambitions of becoming Africa's manufacturing hub. That goal is already beginning to take shape, with many factories relocating from China. Also setting up shop in Ethiopia are investors from Turkey and India. But many experts will tell you it is the new Ethiopia-Djibouti railway that is likely to significantly bring Ethiopia closer to its industrialization dream. Gruntara CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, the signing of a 5-year action plan between the African Union Commission and the government of the People's Republic of China is a critical step towards realizing Agenda 2063 and follows the Memorandum of Understanding signed between the two sides in January of 2015 to promote cooperation in railway, road, regional aviation networks and industrialization fields. A number of milestones are expected to be realized in the next 5 years, and CCTV spoke to Mukta Yedalgi, Director of Infrastructure and Energy at the African Union Commission, to find out what these are.
Thank you very much. Africa's dream to connect all its capitals and major cities with an integrated high-speed rail networks has taken another critical step following the signing of a 5-year action plan between the African Union Commission and China. Now, what does this 5-year action plan entail?
The EU vision is about integration. These projects contribute tremendously to the setup of that vision we have, which is actually to have every capital city in Africa connected by railways. That is what we call our century dream. And we hope we will implement it soon and to make sure that our continent is integrated properly.
At the same time, this 5-year action plan is the result of numerous planning sessions, as you remember, an exchange of visits between the African Union Commission and China since the signing in January 2015 of the Memorandum of Understanding between the two sides. So what are some of the key project highlights of this 5-year action plan?
Well, as I said, this is the action plan is setting up the cooperation between the two parties, China and Africa in general. I just want to highlight the 3 major principles based on which we have actually set up this cooperation. Number 1 is this cooperation should be based on the mutual benefit. Both parties has to see benefit from this cooperation. It's not one way, it's 2 ways cooperation. Number 2, it should be based on promoting local entrepreneurship and local manufacturing, and everything that is actually needed for this project and the setup should be coming from the continent. We would not like to have anything coming imported and exported within the continent. Number 3, capacity building and technology transfer. Those are the major 3 principles that actually are driving this 5-year action plan.
This integrated high-speed train network is a flagship project of Africa's Continental Agenda 2063, the 50 years plan of the continent. Now, break it down for us, the implementation phase and timelines.
That's a very good question, and this is what actually we are still working on. At this point of time, we have set up the framework for the entire project itself, the elements, the component of the project, and soon, as part of the endeavor we are taking, the timeline will be set up soon, and hopefully before the end of the year. The 10 years action plan is setting actually the implementation of the entire flagship project of the African Union. This considers the monitoring, the setup of the governance, the funding, the coordination mechanism with the member state and different stakeholders. All those elements actually are embedded in the 10-year action plan, and certainly this project will be part of that 10 years action plan.
A project of this nature, understandably, is quite complex and has immense cost implications. So what is the overall cost of this project, and how is it going to be funded?
Again, at this point of time, we are preparing the term of references for the feasibility study itself. The project implementation unit will be set up soon. We are already discussing those matters from both parties, China and from the African Union side. And that feasibility study will exactly define the entire cost. And remind you, with the new technology and with the new development in the way the railways are setting up, the cost will be certainly affordable for everybody. I will not anticipate on what's going to happen in the future. However, I am sure we will be making the funding mechanism in a very inclusive manner for all stakeholders that are involved in, meaning the member state, the regional economic communities, our partners will be certainly involved. But again, it is still at the feasibility study stage.
Final question to you. How does the integrated high-speed train network tie in with Africa's aspirations of, forming a continental free trade area, and generally also motivate economic development?
As I was saying at the beginning, not only this is implementing the EU vision in terms of integration, but also that means that it is all those frameworks that has been already accepted within the African Commission, be it the CTFA or the boosting the inter-African trades or CADEP even, and the PIDA implementation. This high-speed train project will be one of the major driving factor for the implementation of those frameworks and visions of the African Union in terms of integration, trade, movement of people, and so on.
We're going to take a short break on the program, but when we come back, my expert guests will help unpack the potential for high-speed rail networks in Africa. To stay with us.
It is to make our country transform and truly make us a middle-income country. Let us not put obstacles that help or that delay our progress to that particular agenda.
That was Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta speaking of the potential of the Kenyan standard gauge railway, expected to be operational by early next year. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, to help unpack the potential for high-speed rail networks in Africa, I have expert guests standing by in Beijing. Liu Shichin, he's a senior researcher at Greenwich University. In Lagos, Johnston Chukwu, he's the director at Power.
10分ぐらい。
いいよ。戻ったらまた声かけて。
はい、チェックアウトします。
はいはいはい。じゃあ続けますね。Okay, let's continue.
Asset Management Limited, and in Johannesburg, Rudolf Duplessis, he's a researcher for the Economic Diplomacy Program at the South African Institute of International Affairs. To you all, thank you for joining in this discussion. Rudolf, I'll start off with you though. Africa's dream to connect all the capitals on the continent from Cape to Cairo, that is becoming a possibility. It is taking shape. First, let me get your thoughts and views on the possibility of an interconnected Africa.
The prospects of it are absolutely amazing. I mean, the project that President Kenyatta is referring to is indeed the biggest investment in Kenya's post-colonial history at $7.6 billion. Now, China has definitely stepped up in a way that many traditional Western financiers haven't. And it's invested in Ethiopia and Djibouti. We've seen the recent completion of the railway there. We've heard news of a massive investment made in Tanzania. There are agreements with South Sudan, with South Africa. It's truly an interesting prospect.
Johnson, let me just get your views here on that interconnectivity for West African region. Of course, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at the West African market, for instance, you realize that one of the greatest challenges we have in West Africa is because we do not have infrastructure that connects the different countries in West Africa. There is actually supposed to be a Trans-Sahara highway that is supposed to run from Central Africa to West Africa. That has been in the pipeline for quite some time, and because of that, we now have a fragmented market in West Africa. It takes a lot of time. It takes goods to move from one West African country to Europe and back to West Africa for you to transport goods through the seaport, because you do not really have a lot of sea-going vessels that can actually move between the West African countries. So it's critical that we build infrastructure in West Africa. We have had a lot on the pipeline for quite some time, but the level of construction is very slow, unlike what we have that just happened in the case of moving from Ethiopia to Djibouti, or what the Kenyans are doing, the Southern Highway, that rail line that is running from Mombasa to Nairobi. The West Africans have been behind in terms of constructing the highways that we need to connect the countries in West Africa.
Mr. Liu Shichin, let me get your perspective here. I mean, this has been described as a very grand project. China building railways, high-speed railways and roads from Cape to Cairo. What is behind China's initiative?
I think that this initiative shows that China's concepted to help the African people to get the same prosperity as the Chinese development in the past 30 years. Because as everybody knows that China has so good relations with the African countries, especially also with many African countries, also very especially with Egypt. So this is a very close connections between these African countries.
Rudolph, we just heard the extent of interconnectivity or lack of in West Africa. Let's hear the state of interconnectivity in the Southern African region. Where are we at the moment?
In terms of Southern Africa, Southern Africa is actually quite integrated due to colonial infrastructure and a lot of the South African initiatives. However, a lot of the lines are quite dilapidated and in quite a bad state. Further compounding it is that the Southern African railway network doesn't actually connect with the East African railway network. So it's in this regard that we need some very serious investment in terms of interlinking these different economic communities. In South Africa, it's quite possible to take a train from, for example, Johannesburg to Cape Town, but it takes quite a while, and definitely in terms of high-speed railway, it would vastly improve interconnectivity and also internal trade within the region.
Right. Mr. Liu, though, a lot of questions are going to be asked about the quality and reliability of the Chinese projects in Africa, particularly because building roads and railways and ports across Africa it is a massive venture by the Chinese. What is the state of Chinese quality and reliability of those projects?
As we know that China has a rich experience in the building and the construction, the road and also railway in the past years, especially also in African countries. As I remember, 45 years ago, we began to build the first railway in Tanzania because my colleague at that time also involved in the project. I was working in the Ministry of the Rail Industry in China. So at that time, I know that China attached a very significant importance for the quality control, and we have a very high level of engineering companies, and we have a very profound management system. So in this way, we put the quality and also management in the first line, that we should not only to build up a railway, but we also have to build up the first class and the first quality of railway to help the African countries there. This is a testimony for China's economy and technology.
This is very good advertisement of Chinese manufacturing and propaganda, right?
Because we have to install all these equipments and to train the people, local people there, and to operate these railways by themselves years before or years after. So in this way, China's technology, China's standard also showed very successful in the years to come.
Right. Johnson, is that an issue though in the Western African region, because the Kaduna-Abuja rail in Nigeria has recently been completed?
Well, yes. What the Chinese have done so far in West Africa, a couple of those projects are, you can actually say, met world-class standards. Take, for instance, the one you just mentioned, the Kaduna-Abuja standard gauge rail, which is the only standard effective or operational standard gauge rail in Nigeria, or in fact in West Africa, was also built by the Chinese, and it's operational as we speak now. And so far, there has not been any complaint about quality. Of course, it's a very new project. There has not been any complaint about quality with respect to that project. There are a couple of other projects that the Chinese are supposed to handle. There's a standard gauge rail that's supposed to run from Lagos to Kano. That's about 1,300 kilometers of standard gauge rail that also is supposed to be handled by the Chinese, but I don't think any substantial work has been done on that. And the government is also planning another rail corridor that was supposed to run from Lagos to Calabar. I think the Chinese are also being considered for that project. That's obviously drawing from the fact that the Kaduna-Abuja standard gauge rail was well done. But that notwithstanding, there has always been concerns about quality when it comes to some of the projects that the Chinese have done in West Africa. But I think the key thing is that there has to be defined standard ab initio at the point of awarding of this contract, and those standards need to be monitored, measured, and enforced. I think once those things are put in place, we should be able to have projects executed in West Africa that meet world-class standard, though they are handled by the Chinese.
Right. Rudolph Duplessis, of course, there are going to be issues that will need to be addressed within the next few years, though, if this major project from Cape to Cairo is to become a reality. What are some of the issues we need to focus on, or the continent should focus on, to make that a feasibility?
Well, one major issue is obviously the issue of land. So I think the ball would very much lie in the court of African countries to ensure that these projects and their feasibility has been tested before implementing them. And then secondly, I think one of the main reasons that colonial railways eventually grew as dilapidated as they did is due to the fact that adequate maintenance wasn't carried out. Now, I think that can be tackled in two ways. The first way would be obviously capacity building initiatives to ensure that there's enough adequate training on the African side, and that there's enough institutions to ensure that these railways are adequately maintained by the right people that can do the job. And then secondly, I think it's also important that the feasibility of these railway lines need to be tested very, very thoroughly, because if these lines are not profitable enough and do not see enough traffic due to maybe market share loss to trucks, for example, there might be the possibility that they might not be affordable and there might not be the funds to maintain. So it's very important to make sure that there's also incentives for people to use these lines, especially in terms of cargo. But I think it's an exciting prospect, and it can definitely sort of assist Africa in terms of creating scale economies. It will bring in investment. It will bring investment in the manufacturing sector, and it will also ensure that intra-African trade be improved, which is vital to the development of Africa.
Right, Johnson Chukwu, obviously in your segment as well, there are issues that you would be hoping that Africa or Chinese can put in place to address the various issues. What do you think those should be?
Well, I think one of the things that should be built into the project is that there must be an extended period of post-project management by the construction companies, so that the projects are managed and supervised by the construction companies for a longer period of time. So if there are failures within that period of time, they should be fixed. And then there should also be the issue of knowledge transfer and skills transfer that should be integrated as part of the project, the contracts, so that local skills are developed to subsequently manage those projects. Just like my colleague just said, a lot of the failures we have in the narrow gauge rails were because the process of knowledge transfer was not effective by the time the Europeans were leaving. And Nigerians or Africans who inherited those rail lines did not have the competencies to manage them. Now that we're talking of next phase of infrastructure development, and the Chinese are basically leading the drive, we should make sure that, one, that there's a knowledge transfer and skills transfer, and two, there's an extended post-project supervision and oversight, so that failures are immediately handled by the project contractors.
Mr. Liu, obviously this is a question for China, though, because there are issues of sustainability post-project and also questions of knowledge and skills transfer. Is this already being built from China, though? Is this already being built into the African projects, into the African perspective?
Yes, actually. So we have already built such system in China also for to import or export to African project. As we know that the railway construction, sometimes we say that the construction is more easier, but the most challenge is after the construction, that the maintenance is more important to keep the railway in good conditions. As we know that in African countries, you have different weather conditions and geological problems, also human being problems and the training problems. So I think the maintenance will become more acute and more focused in the future. So we hope that also China build up a complete engineering project and a system to help the African companies and help African partners to keep good maintenance and perfect professional maintenance to keep the railway in good conditions. I think that maintenance is even more important for the African countries, especially when we are talking about the localization of the project. We have to be aware and pay attention that how to train the local people to be more professional and more effective in maintenance.
Rudolph Duplessis, of course, we are talking about Africa as one entity, but of course Africa is 54 countries at various levels of development here. There are bound to be challenges in achieving this Cape to Cairo initiative.
True, there are definitely challenges. Challenges in terms of just governments being able to speak to each other. There are challenges of geographies. There are challenges of skills available in different countries. But I think in this there are opportunities. Scale economies can definitely assist in developing African infrastructure in terms of also developing African manufacturing capabilities. So where skills transfer is essential in places that are less developed, it is also essential to make sure that African skills, where they exist, are implemented in these places. So that skills transfer not only happen between Chinese to African Chinese to African personnel, but also from African to African personnel. I think that's also important.
Right, Mr. Liu Shijingdo, what are we likely to see in the short term in terms of preparations for this massive project? What are we going to see in the short term, and what will we see in the long term?
I think in the long term, in African countries, we have to pay attention to the 2 points. First point is all the countries related are trying to build up the new ways that should keep the political stabilization. I think political stabilization is the precondition for the economic development in all countries, including also in European or in Asian countries. In African countries, it's the most important thing. I think that because they have some sensitive groups there, they are trying to make troubles to have to influence this such a construction there. The second is the financial problem that most of the African countries are short of financial resources. But I think African states and nation, you have another very strong point. You have very rich resources. I think in this way, to compensate the shortage of financial resources, I think this could be possible. So in the future, the third point...
This is a problem in Africa. He's talking about, okay, you have resources. If you cannot pay it, but pay back by your resources, it's stealing resources from African country by China,
It's also
right?
another for the human, the talented people training to build up a professional and effective and more reliable people that can know the engineering project that have more advanced technologies and then new more management system. So all these 3 points could be realized and help to develop the African economy. I think this is the most important thing for the African countries to emphasize their endeavors to go further in the right direction.
Right, that's all we have time for on this week's Talk Africa. But thank you to my guests for their insights. In Beijing, Liu Chichin, he's a senior researcher at the Renmin University. In Lagos, Johnson Chukwu, he's a director at Cowrie Asset Management Limited. And in Johannesburg, Rudolph Duplessis, he's a junior researcher for the Economic Diplomacy Program at the South African Institute of International Affairs.
Okay. Oh, more. Africa prefers Chinese regime too. They have this one materials until 3. Huh? What?
Yeah. But besides the other videos, has been showing that maybe much more. And actually,
I can hear you. I can hear. I cannot hear.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it sounds to me that the Chinese has been coming long way already, where it's so difficult for Japanese to catch up. And then, yeah, but basically they have big aspiration, big ambition to work with African continent, and which is basically win-win situation between Africa and China. But Japan's, even though sometimes we want to export, that it's been said that Japanese, the government wants to export our transportation system as a package to, but to compare the size of the aspiration of Chinese and Japanese, is obviously the Chinese is much bigger and enough big to attract attention, winning. So, but basically, Japan is also potentially able to have the bigger, the vision, bigger strategy to get more attention from the
but how the bigger aspiration of the Japanese working outside is going to be, what should it be like?
Okay, but first of all, I think you are talking about, I can't hear you very well, but I understand what you want to say. And the current Japanese problem is like Vietnam is the same, okay? This is Africa, but Vietnam is the same. Asia Pacific the same. All over the world the same. Japanese government and foreign ministry is very weak for advertisement of Japan and Japanese manufacturing whatsoever. Like, do you remember a couple of weeks ago you presented Fujitsu agricultural issues at Vietnam, and that was just only the Vietnamese, not English translated. And also, always I told you, South Sudan, Japanese defense force involved past 5 years, but nobody knows that. So we are very poor to explain who we are. That is the reason why, first of all, I'm going to write books, what is so-called Japanese identity this year. But I can't wait until my book publishing, and still book publishing takes time. So I decided to start broadcasting, okay? So the global people watch our YouTube, which I produce, right? And so we're going to explain who we are, and our Japanese global contribution, what we are doing, and also we give them our opinion, right? So, or maybe my opinion. This is very important. We don't have nothing, right? And this is not money. This is right? How to Japanese spirit, right? Sort of, our responsibility, right? So, first of all, I think you need to change the microphone. Otherwise, you're talking about, like, I can't, you're going to join with me and make, for example, today, okay, how do you think about Africa's, Chinese involvement? If you're going to speak out the opinion, but very difficult to listen, hear from you. So first of all, you need to buy microphone first. Okay? And also today I got, halogen lamp now, and also I'm going to, next Monday I'm going to get another lamp I bought, by, internet, very cheap, by internet, auction. So also, this microphone is I bought from, where is this one? It's some, Yamagiwa Denki? Oh, no. Which one? It's, recently, they are quick delivery system, some Japanese, electric company try to deliver for us. Just only the following day, they'll bring kind of sort of things. But anyway, you are right. And this one is today, message is, for you. Okay? Your business is a very heavy threat from Chinese company or Chinese government, right? Maybe you just, you cannot maybe you will feel threat from Chinese. Africa is occupied already, dominance there, but Asia Pacific is also same. No exception.
Yeah. So we are working for, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hear you.
Okay. Yeah, of course I've been working for Japanese government and the country of Japan, but as the independent person working for a private company, then if there's nothing to do with this kind of project, similar project that China is doing, then Japan cannot do the same level of this implementation. And otherwise, yeah, we can some private company can be working for some project, but some level of the contract. But it should be under Chinese project.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the control. We don't have initiative.
Okay, I think listen. Are you going to doing business with Mr. Kwan, right? And this is the best solution working with Vietnamese company or any other Asian countries, a local company. This is, I think, last resort. Japanese company can survive. Technology itself, they cannot survive. Okay, and how to compete against China is you need to work with local company and at equal level, right? So this is the best way to solve the solution. Because anyway, local government is they like to work with local company, right? So this is the best way to solve, how to win a Japanese company in Asia Pacific, not only Asia, the global level. It's I'm recommend Africa. Okay, if you're going to involve in Africa, okay, you need to support the African government, and they give them planning, and without any kind of intention, just free. Japanese is special people. No intention are going to support you. Just actually support them. Sort of activity with local company, local people. This is very important. Democracy is based upon local people, right? So this is the key to get together with those people.
Yeah, so I'm strongly hoping that that concept is going to be the Japanese governmental initiative for the other countries. Because the China is now managing that project as a country, as a nation, encouraging the private companies to join. But just one or few private companies may be able to do something with the overseas project. But if the Chinese as a nation is coming to the ground, then I think the less chance to win.
Wait a minute, I don't recording. I didn't start just a moment. I didn't start recording. Okay, go ahead. I stopped. I just just you return from your desk, return from your work, and then 30 minutes are missing. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Of course, as the Japanese working in private sector, we need to make the best effort that as much as we can do. And also some private company have some spirit to go out and make it happen. But on the other hand,
it doesn't work. Something wrong. No, it doesn't work. Just a moment.